Hello, everyone. We'll take just a couple of minutes to get people signed on, and then we'll get going in just a moment. It's 10 o'clock right now on the West Coast, 1 o'clock Eastern, and we'll give just another minute or so for folks to get signed on. All right, everyone. We'll give it just another couple of minutes. We're having some technical difficulties, so we'll be getting started in just a moment. Okay, good morning, everyone. This is, or good afternoon, depending on where you're located. This is Vignesh Ganapathy. I'm here with Max Bronstein at the Every Life Foundation, and thank you for joining us for our Rare Disease Legislative Advocates August webinar. Sorry about the short notice on getting this set up. There were a couple of agenda items that many organizations wanted to talk about. So we figured we'd have a meeting this month after all. So for our agenda today, Sasha with Pharma and Kay and Carter with Bio will be speaking regarding the new Padufa draft document that was released, I believe, last month. Mary Lee Watts with the American Association for Cancer Research will be speaking on the Rally for Medical Research that's coming up just next month. Jennifer Knapp with the Adrenal Insufficiency United will be speaking regarding a rare disorder registry and database. Patricia Egan will give an update on the Lymphedema Treatment Act. I will give an update on the Every Life Foundation's newborn screening initiative here in California, and Max Bronstein will give a Capitol Hill update on the Cures initiative. So we'll start by passing the baton over to the folks over at Bio and Pharma, if you'd like to get started.
Sure, we will be happy to. Kay, this is Sasha. Yeah. Kay, I was just going to defer over to you. Couldn't hear you.
Okay, hi everyone. This is Kay Holcomb at Bio. And I think that we are going to flip through a little slide set for you rather rapidly. And if you could just go to the next slide. I'm going to just start by giving you a little historical overview of Padufa for those of you who either are new to the issue or just like interesting factoids. So this slide shows you the history of Padufa since 1992 with the enactment of Padufa 1, the very first prescription drug user fee bill. And the purpose of this slide is to show you how the program has grown. And if maybe whoever is on a speakerphone could mute their phone, because you're kind of crashing into the speaker. Yeah, that's you, that person. And how the focus of the prescription drug user fee has changed over the years. So you can see at the left side, 1992 end, in Padufa 1, the program was focused exclusively on reducing the time of review of applications by the FDA. So the goals of Padufa 1 actually could have been written on a postcard as opposed to in a 30-plus page document, because those goals were to reduce the review time to 12 months for a standard application and 6 months for a priority application. And as you can see, as we move out into Padufa 2, it was the decision of FDA negotiating with the industry that one of the important components of getting the review time steadily to be 12 months or 6 months was to be sure that there was communication between sponsors and the FDA that answered questions and dealt with issues that came up during the review, so that by the time you got to the end, you were all set to go. And so there were standards built in for FDA to meet with regard to the timeliness of meetings with sponsors to talk about their pending applications. And also, there were goals for FDA to meet in terms of developing guidance that would help sponsors do a better job and an adequate job of building their application, so when that application came into FDA, it would be a complete application and it would be reviewable in these 12-month and 6-month period. And as time went on, you can see that safety issues, post-approval, post-market safety issues were built into the Padufa program, so FDA had some commitments and some funds to use to do post-market safety surveillance and to report on that post-market safety surveillance. And then as time moved on, some regulatory science initiatives were built into Padufa, and these were initiatives that were designed in the early days to help FDA get on board with cutting-edge science and bring onto the FDA staff experts in these various emerging areas of science that were important to drug development as well as to the best possible and most efficient possible review of applications. And that focus, expanding the Padufa focus to include these sorts of regulatory science initiatives, was a shift from focusing exclusively on the end of an application review, the end of the drug development program, to focusing more on the beginning and the middle of the drug development program. The intention of this was to say, all right, we've fixed, quote unquote, fixed the problem of lengthy and inefficient reviews. We're doing a pretty good job on meeting these goals of 12 months and 6 months. What we need to do now is a better job working with sponsors to make the drug development process more efficient, so that this total of 8 to 10 to 12 years that it takes to get a drug to the point of an application to the FDA, that maybe can be made more efficient as well. And when you go all the way out to the right-hand side, this is Padufa 6, and you see that on that end, we are doing significant work, and FDA is making significant commitments that we are going to be talking about in a minute that are going to have a direct impact on the drug development process and the efficiency of that process. So that's just a little history of Padufa. The next slide shows you what you probably know, which is the timeline for the reauthorization of Padufa 6. This process began with a Federal Register notice in 2015, in May of 2015, where FDA announced the initial public meeting to talk about Padufa 6 and opened a docket, and then September of 2015, negotiations began with the industry and meetings began with stakeholders so that FDA could meet with stakeholders including patient and provider groups, academics, consumer groups, and other people who have a very strong interest in Padufa, so that those groups could provide their input to FDA, and FDA then would be able to bring that input to bear on the negotiations to determine what the commitments would be and what the fees would be in the upcoming 5 years. And I want to emphasize how important, and many of you may have participated in this process. FDA did continue to meet with stakeholders beginning in September through February of this year on a monthly basis to get that feedback and get that input. And it's so important for patient organizations in particular to be a real part of this process. And definitely it matters. And those perspectives definitely are taken into account as these Padufa commitments are developed. And as you know as well, at the right side of this slide, it shows you what the end game here is. And that end game begins this coming Monday, August 15th, with a public meeting at FDA in which FDA is again going to take input from all of the various stakeholders, not just industry, but patient, consumer, provider, et cetera, stakeholders, asking them what do they think about the commitment letter now that it's in its semi-final form. And then the deadline for FDA to submit the commitment letter plus the legislative language to reauthorize Padufa is January 15th. But I believe that FDA very much would like to see that submission to Congress go earlier than January. And they would like to see this happen before the transition begins between two administrations, recognizing that during that transition period, which can last for several months or a number of months, things often fall through the cracks, if you will, because simply not having the people on board yet in a new administration to make those decisions. The third slide basically makes the point that is an important point to make, the next slide, which is that looking at all of these Padufa commitments all together, the bottom line of those commitments is positive movement in the direction of drug development efficiencies, review efficiencies, policy efficiencies, but without affecting in a negative way FDA's timelines for review or the FDA high standards, the gold standard in the world for safety and efficacy of marketed prescription drug products. And I'm going to turn it over to Carter now to talk about a couple of the few of the key commitments in the commitment letter.
Thanks, Kay. If we could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So a top priority, certainly for everyone on this call and the broader patient advocacy community, the biopharmaceutical industry, as well as the agency and policymakers, was and is to advance the systematic integration of patient perspectives into drug development and review processes. I think we're very pleased with the outcome of the commitment letter and believe that the provisions in the commitment letter will do just that. So firstly, and very importantly, the commitment letter will provide resources to enable FDA to strengthen staff capacity for the review and analysis of patient information provided. These dedicated staff will be placed within review divisions across CBER and CDER and serve as core members of the review team. In addition to serving as members of the review teams, they will also engage with patients, advocates, and other stakeholders to advance the science, methodologies, and understanding of how patient perspective information can and will be used in regulatory decision-making. This includes advancing the development and utilization of clinical outcomes assessments, which includes patient-reported outcomes. FDA will use a public process that includes holding public workshops to develop a sequential series of guidances together, and these workshops will provide for the gathering of stakeholder feedback on approaches to collecting patient and caregiver input that are scientifically robust enough to be used in the regulatory decision-making process and enable the communication of critical information to patients, such as inclusion of information in the labeling of products. You see before you some brief summaries, and I'm going to walk through what each of these guidances what information these guidances will provide. The first will focus on how to ensure the collection of comprehensive and representative patient and caregiver data. This guidance will also include information on a standardized nomenclature and terminologies, as well as methodological considerations for data collection and analysis. The second guidance will focus on process and approaches to determine what impacts are most important to patients. It will address methods for identifying what is most important to patient in terms of the burden of disease, the burden of treatment, and how this information can be utilized to better inform drug development and review. The third guidance, and if you look at these sort of building upon each other, the third guidance will provide information on how to use these identified impacts discussed in the second guidance, and that is, again, what is most important to patients, and how that information can be used to facilitate meaningful patient input in clinical trials. So in other words, using that information on how to use those impacts to determine what to measure in a clinical trial. The fourth guidance will revise and supplement current guidances on patient-reported outcomes, as well as provide information on methodologies that will better enable the development and utilization of clinical outcomes assessments as endpoints, robust enough, again, for regulatory decision-making and inclusion in the label. FDA will also conduct a public meeting on enhancing patient engagement in clinical trials, and this will be how to use all of this patient information discussed in all of these various guidances to better ensure that trials are designed in a way that is better for patients and taking into account their individual needs based on the diseases they are dealing with. Lastly, FDA will also create and maintain a repository of publicly available tools, including a clinical outcome assessment compendium. So if we can go to the next slide. Building upon another, and we believe that the provisions regarding enhancing a structured approach to benefit-risk assessment are intricately tied, again, to advancing patient-focused drug development. What the commitment letter does is it builds upon the work started in Padufa 5 by further enhancing a structured approach to benefit-risk assessments, including the incorporation of a patient's voice in the structured benefit-risk framework and utilization of this framework throughout the life cycle of a drug. Specifically, FDA will publish an update to the implementation plan for a structured approach to benefit-risk assessment. They will, in addition, they will hold a public meeting to help inform the development of a guidance that will focus on using a structured benefit-risk framework throughout the life cycle of a drug, the incorporation of patient perspectives into the framework, all in order to provide consistent and predictable benefit-risk assessments. This guidance will also provide information on appropriate approaches to better communicate a drug's benefit risk to the public. And lastly, to ensure successful implementation of these provisions, FDA will conduct an evaluation of the implementation of the structured benefit risk framework, including how it is being applied by reviewers across FDA with the goal of developing best practices. So again, taken together, we believe that this will go a long way in furthering patient-focused drug development. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to, I believe, Sasha.
Sure, thank you very much. This is Sasha Haverfield. I'll try and keep it very brief over the next 3 slides in order to catch us up a little bit, and maybe we'll have a few minutes at the end to answer some of your questions. And the next 3 slides actually deal with issues that have been very important, not just to an industry perspective, but a stakeholder perspective, and were highlighted through the 21st Century Cures process that I think you're going to talk about at the very end of this call as well. And one of those issues has been biomarkers, hugely important from a drug development discovery perspective, very important from figuring out the efficacy, the safety of new medicines. And as you know, one of the frustrations has been the absence of a biomarker qualification process. And so as these ideas came up and were advanced in the 21st Century Cures and the Innovation for Healthy Americans, we obviously took note, and it was injected, again, as Kay outlined in the very beginning, into the public consultation process between the stakeholder community, patient groups, and the FDA. And so what Padufa 6 created here is essentially a framework to facilitate qualification, again, using that same kind of approach, public workshops to discuss what is the taxonomy, what are the appropriate scientific standards, how do we get the essential elements in place for a biomarker qualification plan, but then also adding on other things like, are there processes that we can pilot at FDA that allows the FDA to bring in external expertise into the review of biomarker qualification submissions? So all of that is mirrored actually by something that is, again, very important from a discovery perspective, and that is setting up an early consultation process between FDA and drug developers on the use of a biomarker as a new surrogate endpoint where it's never been used as the primary endpoint. Again, all of these are provisions from a regulatory science perspective that have the potential to truly advance decision-making and accelerate the availability of new medicines. Real-world evidence on the next slide, if you go to that, is a similar example. If you guys just think back about 5 to 10 years in the availability of data, our personal devices that we were carrying at the time and how technology has moved on. And so we want to focus your attention here on the second bullet point, the definition of what is actually RWE, what is real-world evidence, meaning data regarding the use, the benefits and the risks of drugs derived from sources other than randomized clinical trials. And so in short, what Padufa will try to do is explore how and what the appropriate context is for the use of real-world evidence for regulatory decision-making, so that it can, for example, enhance control groups, historical control groups, or contribute to the evaluation of new indications from a safety and efficacy perspective. All of that is, again, a very important component of the regulatory science initiatives. And then let me jump to the next slide on rare diseases and the rare disease program at FDA. And here it's, I think, very important to remember that in Padufa 2 and Padufa 3, and Kay went over that, what we quite often call the rainbow slide of the expansion of the program. Rare diseases, the rare disease program at FDA, was kind of first an exploratory piece, and then kind of, it was not at the heart of the review process. But I think what we've seen over Padufa 4, 5, and 6, especially now in 5 and 6, is that rare disease development has moved to the center and has become the core of FDA's work under the Human Drug Review Program. If you just think about 2015, where 90%, 9 out of 10 new drugs that were approved that were breakthrough therapies were for rare indications. Just under 50% of all drugs approved in 2015 carried a rare indication. But what that actually means is, while we have made major advances in the discovery and development, there's clearly still work for us to be done on training, on outreach, on guidance updates, and that will be covered by Padufa 6. So with that, I think, Kay, I'm handing over to you for a quick review of the combo product.
Yes, thanks, Sasha. And this, the commitments under Padufa 6 relating to combination products talk about the importance, in particular, the importance because of the increase in interest in and use of personalized medicine, of products that combine a drug or a biologic with a medical device. And FDA has struggled to coordinate its activities that go across 2 or 3 centers, Center for Drugs, Center for Biologics, and Center for Devices, and in a way that makes the process of reviewing these kinds of products efficient, and also that provides guidance in advance to companies about what will be expected when they have an application for one of these combination products. So these commitments will do a couple of things similar to previously discussed commitments. They will, number one, enhance the staff capacity. In other words, add more people to FDA so that the combination products review can be more efficient. And for the first time ever, under a prescription drug user fee program, some of those people whose salaries will be paid with user fees from Padufa will be housed in the Center for Devices. And this acknowledges that every center involved in the review of a combination product needs to have skin in the game. They need to have the incentive and the resources to do their part of the review process. Otherwise, everything lags behind. And these important products that have, for example, a diagnostic and a drug together are crucial, and all of you know about some of them, but they are becoming increasingly important as we focus more on personalized medicine. The next slide highlights another issue related to incorporating new technologies and new ideas into the FDA review process to acknowledge that we need to do more to help make the drug development process more efficient. So this commitment relates to the use of innovative clinical trial designs. So one example of such an innovative trial design is a so-called adaptive clinical trial. And people talk a lot about adaptive trials and about the necessity when you are doing an adaptive trial to use a different kind of statistical approach to analyzing the data, called a Bayesian statistical approach. And these are things that are, if I could use the term hit or miss at FDA right now, that across the board review divisions are not always as receptive to this notion of an innovative trial design, don't know exactly what to do about it. So this Padufa commitment is to, number one, increase the staff capacity, particularly with respect to biostatisticians. Number two, develop and operate a pilot project in which companies can voluntarily submit their innovative trial design, and they will get 2 designated meetings with FDA to talk about the design and then how to move their project forward using that trial design. And the information from that pilot project will be made public by FDA, not proprietary information, obviously, but it will be made public by FDA in workshops and meetings that are going to be designed to make other people in the industry aware of the kinds of innovation in trial design that are possible to do. And the hope is that this will build up people's interest in doing innovative designs that potentially will reduce the time and the cost of the clinical phases of drug development. This does not mean that randomized controlled trials will no longer be done. That is not the case. This is a way of reducing the full dependence of a development program on a particular type of trial and allowing for more flexibility in doing that. Back to you, Sasha, to talk about hiring and resource management.
Okay, thank you, Kay. So just briefly here to wrap it up, we told you a lot in the last 25 minutes about scientific advances, about regulatory systems and so on. But what lies, as we all know, at the heart of America's regulatory review system, at the heart of FDA being the gold standard of all agencies across the world, are the people that are behind the agency. The scientists, doctors, manufacturing experts, data people, IT experts that make up the expertise of the agency and that allow the agency to keep pace with 21st century innovation. And so one of our lessons learned from Padufa 5 was, and the regulatory science initiatives there was, unless we can provide FDA with a system that provides long-term stability and sustainability from a planning perspective and allow them or give them the tools to hire and retain the expertise that they need to engage in the regulatory review, we cannot succeed as a society. And so for the first time in the history of Padufa, Padufa 6 will include detailed agency hiring goals. There will be a modernization of FDA's hiring infrastructure with things like a position management system to be put in place. There will be additional staff capacity from an HR perspective, including also outside capacity through third parties of not only HR individuals, but also an entity that will look and work with the agency over the next few years at continuously asking the question, how can we improve the system? How can we improve FDA's recruitment, hiring itself, and then the retention of the scientists and MDs that we need to be at the agency. And all of that to be outlined in an annual assessment and progress report so that the public, all of us, industry, academia, the patient community, policymakers on the Hill can engage and support the agency in their efforts. And with that, I'll stop here. I'll close and see if there are any questions for the three of us.
All right, I will open up the lines in just a moment.
While Vicky is opening up the line, this is Max, and I have a question for Sasha, who you touched biomarkers, and we've been getting some questions here about biomarker validation versus qualification. Can you add in if that's in the...
Hi, I'm not quite sure I caught the full gist of your question. You were breaking up. Let me just repeat what I heard. I think you said you gotten some conflicting information about biomarker qualification, so the public process on how biomarkers can be used in the context of use, versus the validation process, or some people refer to it, the use of a biomarker in the proprietary development program.
Yes, I was just hoping the difference.
Okay, so actually, at a very high level and simplified, I think these are two sides of the same medal, because they of the same coin. They require the same expertise at the FDA. They require a framework to be set on what is the information that is required in order to show that a biomarker does what it's intended to do, that it's valid for regulatory decision-making. We need to have evidentiary standards in place, and so on, and so on. And I see them actually as a cyclical event, that a biomarker may first be explored by an individual sponsor in a proprietary development program for use as a surrogate endpoint, for example. And Padufa puts provisions in place, or Padufa 6 will put provisions in place that allow sponsors to have these conversations very early on in development to explore gaps that may exist, and then be able to fill in those gaps with the goal of using a biomarker as a primary endpoint in a development program. If that works out, once the drug becomes approved, that information becomes public. And I think this is where it intersects again with the qualification process, where Padufa 6 will provide a framework on public meetings, on guidances, about evidentiary standards, about taxonomy, and so on, where that information from a proprietary use of a biomarker can then be injected into the evaluation. Can this actually be used to raise all votes? Are there other contexts of use that are valid, not only in the context of this narrow development program, this one single drug, but in this disease area, in this broader context of use? And so I think the information will help advance both the qualification process and the use of a biomarker for proprietary purposes in a development program, what sometimes is referred to as validation.
Thank you for clarifying. Other questions?
I've got a question for Carter. I believe you were talking about patient-focused drug development and the guidances under Padufa on that. My questions were regarding, so there's the Patient-Focused Impact Assessment Act in the 21st Century Cures package, and it also requires a number of guidances as meeting many of the goals. So I was kind of curious about how the two may complement each other, or what the differences are, and you know, whether there's an effort to make sure that the FDA isn't doing duplicative work on that.
Yeah, I'll take a stab at that, and then I'll also toss it to my colleagues, Kay and Sasha, to add any additional comments. I think we look at the provisions in HR 6 as complementary. There are some specific provisions that you could look at as being overlapping, similar, but we do not see them as contradictory. There's also some additional language in HR 6 that regarding how to, information on how to submit information to the FDA that we know a lot of people in the patient community are very supportive of. So Kay or Sasha, did you have any additional comments to that?
No, I think that's right. I think these are very complementary provisions.
And we have a question from Aubrey who asks if there's anything you would have liked to see in Padufa 6 that did not get included.
I think I would say on behalf of Bio that we felt that our dream came true here. We think this is an excellent agreement, and it touches on all of the issues that were raised by our companies in preparing to engage with FDA on Padufa in one way or the other. It touches on all of those things, and the bonus points that I would give this is that FDA came to the table with even some additional proposals that advance further this ultimate goal of the most efficient process to develop drugs, to review drugs, and to get drugs approved to patients as quickly as possible.
So from a pharma perspective, and I fully agree with Kay, I think we view this as a transformational agreement from a number of angles. And I think what we have to give credit to is the entire environment that came together in 21st Century Cures and Innovation for Healthy Americans and surfaced a number of the ideas that you see in this very comprehensive package of regulatory science initiatives as well as regulatory enhancements in the review process. And I think that combined with the in-depth and very long negotiations between industry and FDA, supplemented and supported by the community engagement with all of the stakeholders done by FDA, has led to an agreement that I think in its scope, in its focus, and its attention to not only working on the review process, but also looking at the future of innovation, of medical product development, and the viability of the agency from a hiring perspective, from a financial reform perspective. I think let's all of us look back on that agreement and say we can be proud of what we have achieved here. Now we have to ensure that there's timely reauthorization of the package so that FDA's ability to pursue its public health mission is not endangered, because as you guys know, if we were to reach next July or sometime in early summer and there's no credible path to the legislative reauthorization, FDA would have to send out RIF notices to several thousand FTEs and of their employees, and that would be highly, highly detrimental to not just new drugs going through the pipeline in the IND process, but just think about safety oversight. Think about additional indications being pursued. It would be disastrous from a human drug review program and would probably set us back in ways that we can't even imagine.
Okay. Thank you. So thank you for answering that question. We have one more question, and unfortunately we have to move on. This has been really great so far, but so the Padufa has tons of content. It's long. There's a lot of information in there. What would you guys recommend would be a good summary that is appropriate for sort of more general audiences? You know, what does the average patient advocate need to know about Padufa?
So what I would say is there are probably 3 or 4 quick bullet points that one can go over, right? And I think I would always start with that Padufa is the reason why the U.S. leads the world in introduction of new medicines, that over the last 25 years, Padufa is the reason why more than 1,500 new drugs and biologics have reached patients, including treatments for cancer, rare diseases, neurological diseases, infectious diseases. I think I would then go to that it's imperative that we have a consistent, predictable, and efficient regulatory environment that is provided by Padufa, that Padufa has strengthened the safety and efficacy standards. And I think then I would pivot to not only have we strengthened the safety and efficacy standards and the review process, but Padufa 6 advances regulatory sciences and puts the agency on a stable footing from an administrative perspective.
Great, thank you very much. I think at this point we're ready to move on. I know we're running long on the call, but this is a really important topic. Thanks to the folks from Bio and Pharma. Very nice overview, and thank you guys for making it available to do this. Viggy, do you want to turn over to our next speaker?
Sure. Next we'll have Mary Lee Watts with AACR, who will give an update on the rally for a medical. We'll just pass it over to her right now.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. I want to thank Max and Vignes and Every Life Foundation for giving us the opportunity to talk about the upcoming Rally for Medical Research Hill Day. Some of you may be familiar with this now annual event, and some of you may not. So I'm just going to have just a few slides just to walk you through what it is and what we're doing next month, and hope that all of you, if you're not already, will consider joining us. So please save the date, September 22nd, 2016. It is a Thursday, is going to be the day of this year's Rally for Medical Research Hill Day. Just to, let's see if I can get these to advance. There we go. Okay. So just to recap, the mission is and now it's getting ahead of me. All right. Sorry about that. Okay. So as you can see here, the purpose of the Rally Hill Day really is to bring together stakeholders from all across the medical research advocacy community to speak with one voice about the importance of funding for the National Institutes of Health. And it, at this point, has evolved to a group of more than 325 organizations and institutions. Every Life is one of them. Pharma and bio as well, from our previous speakers, have been also part of this initiative. In industry, patient, every type of science and condition and disease and age spectrum, basic to clinical to translational research, have all come together to join this effort. And it really dates back to 2013 when the AACR, along with many of us across the community, were very concerned about sequestration and the outright cuts that took place to NIH. And we actually had a physical rally in the streets of Washington, D.C. On April 8th of 2013. And really, from that event, we had 10,000 people there. It then evolved into an annual Hill Day. There was a lot of interest in continuing the momentum, particularly because, as you all know, 3 years ago we were still looking at a fairly grim situation when it comes to NIH funding. And so we had our first Hill Day September of 2013 and have now done it annually since. So this is our fourth year. We started out with about maybe 220 or so individuals, and this year we're expecting to top more than 300 folks coming to the Hill. We typically have as many as 40 of the 50 states represented. It's always our goal to get as much representation from across the country as possible. We also have probably more than 100 upwards of 120 different organizations and institutions that are actually represented at the Hill Day, which is just remarkable, the breadth and scope. So the general calendar of events is as follows. We do provide training opportunities. As you can imagine, there's a wide range of expertise that in the folks who come to Hill and come to this event. Some are first-timers, have never gone before Congress, and others have done this for many years. So we offer a webinar. You can see the date and time, and then we also have an in-person training session that we do the day before the Hill Day. We also really kick off the events with a community-wide celebration, a reception on Capitol Hill. This year, we're excited it's going to be on the House side for a change, the Cannon Caucus Room, and this is an opportunity for folks to hear from members of Congress who've been our champions on this topic. We also typically have representatives, again, from across the NIH advocacy spectrum to share their stories. And then the day of the event, we kick it off with a breakfast where we again have speakers and have an opportunity for people to get with their teams before they head up to the Hill. And then, of course, there's a day of Hill meetings. So that's the sort of the general overview of how it plays out. And right now, we are in the process of just registering participants, and we're encouraging everyone to try to register by August 29th. That's a Monday. We do have a little bit of flexibility, but ideally we want everyone registered by then since the meeting scheduling will be well underway. So here you can just see, encourage all of you, if you haven't been already, to go to the Rally website. Here you will see a lot more information, the organizations involved. We actually have some of our videos from our past Hill Days posted, a schedule of events like I just outlined. And we also have a resources tab where in the coming weeks we're going to begin to post all of the materials that will be part of this Hill Day, from the leave behinds to the messaging for the attendees. The message really is thanking Congress for providing NIH with a $2 billion increase in December of last year, and really urging them to continue that momentum supporting the Senate mark of $2 billion for FY 2017 for NIH, thanking them also for considering innovative ways to support NIH. I would say cures would certainly be the way that folks have been talking a lot about additional ways outside of regular appropriations to support NIH. And then lastly, really encouraging Congress to get the work done this year. We're very concerned about long-term CRs and what that means for the NIH budget. So wanting to make sure that that message gets across. In addition to just the Hill Day itself, we also really push to have a broad social media and grassroots presence. And I'll speak to the grassroots presence on the last slide, but just wanted to point out that the rally does have a Facebook page. We encourage all of you and your organizations to like it as we are ramping up the posts now in advance of the Hill Day and really welcome people to cross-post and share their stories. We also have a Twitter handle and hashtag that you see here. We already have a lot of buzz on the hashtag, again, just encouraging people to sign up and join us. We also do a Rally, I Rally For campaign, and there's the page has a little downloadable card, but one of the things that we've done, started last year and people wanted to continue this year, is just a way to, again, just get people involved and show support and show the breadth of this effort. And so holding up a card with an I Rally For and filling in a person, a condition, a disease, a type of science, an institution, what have you, and really sharing those out on Twitter and Facebook. We're also going to have the opportunity to take photos of participants when they come to Washington. We have a style guide as well. A lot of our partners help promote the event through their newsletters and through emails, and so we have a way for you to download the common branding and the banners and whatnot. And then lastly, I mentioned that we have a National Day of Action. So for those folks who can't be with us in Washington on September 22nd, we are doing a National Day of Action, which is going to be a nationwide effort to email, to call Congress, to engage in social media, and in some cases, folks are looking to do some local media opportunities, but really to have a big push that day, and so folks not in Washington can still complement the message that's being delivered here. So that is the overview. I know I realize I did not put my email on here, but you can go to the website. There's info, I-N-F-O, at rallyformedicalresearch.org if you have questions, and you also are welcome to email me directly, and it's just marylee.watts@aacr.org, and I'm sure Max and Vignesh could share that as well. But thanks for the opportunity, and I'll turn it back over.
Great. Thank you, Mary Lee. We'll hold off on questions since we're running a little behind, and we can hopefully address any of your questions toward the end of the call. So now we'll move over to Jennifer with Adrenal Insufficiency United, who will be speaking regarding the rare disease database.
Hi, this is Jennifer Knapp. I'm with Adrenal Insufficiency United. My daughter has congenital adrenal hyperplasia, which is one of 60-some conditions, most of them being rare, that cause adrenal insufficiency. I'm trying to see how to move the slide. So in 2015, we were able to find a state senator in Oregon to introduce 2 bills on behalf of those with adrenal insufficiency. Both involved setting up protocols and training to treat an adrenal crisis, which can be a life-threatening event for someone with adrenal insufficiency. Throughout that process, we got the idea for a rare disease database. So we have been working with a group of people on Facebook and some in our organization, some in others, to put this together. So this picture just kind of shows the homepage of the website that we've been working on. And we're calling it ORDER. So Order for Rare Disease Emergency Response is kind of the name we came up with. And the idea for this came out of our legislative work in 2015. One of the bills we were trying to pass was targeting the EMS and ER personnel. And we had a lot of pushback on that bill from fire chiefs, emergency personnel, doctor groups, and everything. And their main complaints with the bill was that only doctors should decide what procedures are done, not a bill, and that adrenal insufficiency was just too rare to warrant a bill. And so a lot of the legislators that are also physicians talked about a system called PULST. And it started in Oregon, but it's a national system called Physician Orders for Life-Sustaining Treatment. And what it does is the patient and the doctor have a conversation about what their end-of-life wishes are, and the doctor submits a form to this database with those instructions, so that if somebody with a end-of-life event is at the hospital, they can look up their number and find out what their wishes are. So that's kind of where this idea comes from. We're still trying to develop it and working together. We have some physicians in our group, and just looking for the best way to put this together to reach those goals, to make sure that anyone with a rare disease can go into the ER. You can tell them, here's my bracelet, it has my order number. They could look it up, and then those instructions would be right there for the physician. So I'm just going through pages that are kind of on the website right now. We've been playing around with order forms. That would be an enrollment form. So our idea is that patients would fill out part of the form, and then they would pass it on to their doctor, who would fill out his or her information. And then the last part of the form would have those specific instructions. So the doctor would list the conditions for what the patient's seen, and then there would be, are there specialized instructions needed for this patient for emergency care, surgical care, or day-to-day care, you know, should the person be admitted. And so all this would be put into the database, and if you're at the ER, it would pop up with your flag if you needed specialized emergency care, surgical care, or the day-to-day care, and then the provider could then go to that page and see what those specialized instructions are. So that's kind of the concept that we're doing right now. This is our website, or sorry, our Facebook page, where we're just inviting people to join us. We do some video conversations every other week or so to try to kind of brainstorm together and put this together. We're hoping to get a lot of nonprofit groups on board so we can collaborate and work together. Ideally, it would be great to you know, possibly find, you know, one database that every state could use, so that if you're in Oregon, where I live, and my daughter, you know, travels to Idaho, that she could get the same care there. So we're still looking at all those options, and the website's kind of a work in progress. So that's about the summary of what we're doing.
Great, thank you, Jennifer. As I mentioned, we're running a little behind. You know, I urge you all to contact Jennifer at her email address here, and visit order.healthcare to learn more about the Rare Disease Database Project. And we'll try and keep a little bit of time toward the end for any questions you may have. With that, I'll pass it on to Patricia Egan, who will give an update on the Lymphedema Treatment Act.
All right, thank you so much, Vignesh and Max. Now let's see here. Okay, now I have control. So I've already spoken about the Lymphedema Treatment Act and its need in previous discussions. So I'm just going to fast forward here to what's current. And what's current is that as of the close for summer recess, we had 240 co-sponsors in the House and 23 co-sponsors in the Senate. And over the summer, we have placed a tremendous emphasis on our constituent teams in all 50 states for them to set up district meetings with the legislative aides and to participate as fully as possible in town hall meetings and calls. We know that we're going to have more co-sponsors on board when Congress resumes, and we are aiming for a supermajority in the House so that we can really bring this bill to a vote. And we hope that when that happens in the House, the Senate will step up also. So I thank RDLA for all of its tremendous support, for the legislative briefing that you published for us, and we know that all of our colleagues in the rare disease community have helped us to get to this point. So thank you. I'll send it back to you, Vigna.
All right, thank you.
Okay.
And of course, you can contact Patricia at her email address at patricia.egan@lymphnet.org or visit lymphedema-treatment-act.org to learn more about the bill. So with that, I'll give an update on the Every Life Foundation's newborn screening initiative. So there's me, Vignesh Ganapathy. I'm the policy manager here at the Every Life Foundation. And if you're not familiar, our California Newborn Screening Initiative is set out to address a very specific problem. The current newborn screening infrastructure nationally is a patchwork of state screening requirements. So while California may screen for 56 diseases, Texas may only screen for 21 or so. And because of that, many babies across the country are falling through the gaps, and that creates tremendous delay in diagnosis and getting them very needed therapies. However, on the national level, the Secretary of Health and Human Services convenes an advisory committee on heritable disorders, and that advisory committee issues what's known as the Recommended Uniform Screening Panel. In order for a disease to be added to this panel, it's nominated, considered by the committee, and then goes through a rigorous process of review through which scientists, doctors, and other professionals look at the disease and the feasibility of testing for the disease at the state level, and then finally make a recommendation to the Secretary of Health and Human Services. If the HHS Secretary approves the disease, it's added to the RUSP, and it's only a recommendation at that point. So we are seeking to try and streamline this process. On average, it tends to take up to 4 years for a disease to be added to the RUSP, and states individually can take up to 8 years after that to actually begin screening. So the reason we chose California is the foundation's based here, and the state screens for 540,000 newborns each year, which is one of the largest numbers in the country. And they screen for all except for 2 of the conditions on the RUSP, that's Pompe and MPS I, both of which have had FDA-approved therapies for over a decade. Most recently, the state passed a bill screening for ALD, which was at the point that it would be added to the RUSP, which it just was this past year. So our bill is SB 1095. It was introduced by State Senator Richard Pan, a pediatrician who has authored life-saving ALD and SCID newborn screening legislation. And what this bill would do is it would allow the state to screen for a disease as soon as it's added to the Recommended Uniform Screening Panel. This would eliminate the legislative delay, that the 4 years and 8 years that I mentioned before, and it would ensure that you wouldn't have to pass new legislation for every disease that's added to the RUSP. It takes a scientific approach as opposed to a political one, so you know, rather than looking at how many advocates there might be in a particular state or you know, trying to make these incredibly arduous and difficult process for many advocates. This ensures that, you know, we look at it in a way in which we can see whether there's a viable screen for it and the impact that that would have on the patients themselves. And of course, it would allow for the earliest treatment possible, which would save many patients' lives. So the process here in California, each bill must pass 2 committees in each house. That's the Health Committee and the Appropriations Committee of the Senate and the State Assembly. And we've been working to get economic data to show that screening for MPS I and Pompe will save the state money. California is a fairly financially conservative state in some ways. regardless of its reputation, and they care a lot about balancing the budget and any new spending that they might incur. So our recent legislative successes, on June 2nd, the bill passed the Senate floor unanimously. And soon thereafter, it passed the Assembly Health Committee also, again, unanimously. We had advocates from across California come to testify. We have photos here of some of them with Dr. Pan and other advocates in front of the State House. And the only committee that's left is the Assembly Appropriations Committee before it heads to the Assembly floor. So the state of play currently, the Department of Public Health has expressed some concern that they'll need time to implement screening and secure funding in the budget. So we're working with them to try and craft a workable timeline so that we can ensure that, you know, these diseases are screened for at the earliest possible time. Some important upcoming dates. August 11th, the bill will be, that's tomorrow, the bill will be heard in the Assembly Appropriations Committee and hopefully moved off of the suspense file. And then we have until August 31st for the Assembly to make a floor vote. And then there's 1 month from August 31st for the governor to either sign or veto the bill. So here are the ways in which you can help. If you have any case studies on the benefits of late versus early treatment, let's say sibling studies, your children, yourselves, you can submit them on the EveryLife site. You can also sign on to our letter that currently has over 112 endorsing national patient organizations with everyone from March of Dimes, NORD, the Muscular Dystrophy Association, and Global Genes. And of course, you can share this link with your networks. Try and get the word out there and help us make this bill law. And finally, if you have any other further questions, you can contact me here at the Foundation. Here's my contact information at bganapathy@everylifefoundation.org, or visit the website. And with that, I will pass it on over to my colleague, Max Bronstein.
Thanks, Viggy. Thanks for the exciting update on newborn screening. I'm going to be talking a little bit about what's going on in D.C. this month and coming up in September. The first slide I have here is I found this adorable Padufa picture, which maybe Pharma Bio can borrow if they want, but I'm actually not going to talk about this because we just spent a lot of time talking about Padufa, but I wanted to make sure it was on everyone's radar because this is a really important development and certainly has big implications for the rare disease community. One of the main things that the Foundation has been working on for the past 2 years now in many patient organizations throughout the community beyond just rare diseases is something called the 21st Century Cures Act. I know many of you are already familiar with this, but for those who might not be familiar with this, this is a very broad and really historic piece of legislation that could really transform medical research in the country and even go beyond that with some important changes to FDA as well. So there's a huge number of provisions in this legislation that ultimately passed the House over a year ago. This was back in July 2015, and the numbers there indicate the vote, so there was actually a lot of bipartisan agreement about how important this bill was and getting it through the House. And it was, of course, led by Chairman Upton and Congresswoman Baguette were the sort of main champions behind the bill, as well as Max Schill, who's the sort of honorary lobbyist who really helped make this bill possible and its success possible in the House. And then once it passed the House, it was passed over to the Senate. The Senate really started to take action on this the very early part of this year, but they took a very different approach to the legislation. House did. They kind of wanted to address it in a more piecemeal approach, so they wanted to pass individual bills rather than bundling the package together and voting on it. So many of those bills have totally passed through committee at this point, so they actually held 3 separate hearings over the course of 3 months. And you can see these were all of the individual pieces that were included and ultimately passed within committee. So the idea is, now that those bills are all together, is to kind of engross them and then try to get a package to the Senate floor. But the biggest challenge that remains, and this has been a sticking point for some time now, is really how to fund the legislation. We're living and working in a political environment now where typically when you call for increasing funding in one area of government, you have to find the money from some other existing area of government, which kind of sets the stage for a whole new political dispute and a political fight. So there basically needs to be some kind of deal reached about how to pay for the funding increases that are proposed in the Cures bill. And the biggest budget items in there are going to relate to the proposed funding increases for the NIH, for the FDA, and I know many of you have also been active on the Open Act, and this is another bill that does have a cost to it, although it's quite modest compared to some of the other items in the legislation. So that's the big thing, is trying to figure out how to pay for this, but all of this is happening in an environment that's quite politically chaotic. You know, we have Zika, which is not going to go away as a public health issue, and Congress has yet to take action on that. We have the appropriations process, which is happening concurrently, and fiscal year ends at the end of September, so Congress has to come to an agreement. They must pass an agreement, otherwise federal government can't actually fund itself. So that's going to be a large package that will have to be debated, so that will take time from the floor, and all of this, of course, is happening among a very contentious and at times entertaining presidential race. So there's just a lot going on this year, and so we're basically competing for Congress's attention during this time. So assuming that people can come together and actually make a deal on how to fund the proposed increases in Cures, the next step would be for the legislation to go to the Senate floor for a vote, and then it would go to conference. So that would be the time in which the House and the Senate actually reconcile any differences that exist between the bills that were passed. And then they send that package to the President's desk for signature, at which point he would sign or veto the legislation. So our role as advocates is really to keep up the momentum, which I know is a tough thing to do, but we've seen advocates really step up. I mean, we've seen news articles. RDLA is sponsoring our in-district meetings right now. We have nearly 200 meetings scheduled this summer for advocates to meet with their representatives and their senators across the country. So these are great ways to stay engaged and to kind of keep this on the radar of Congress, despite all the other things that are going on. And then later in September, once Congress resumes, we are planning a national advocacy campaign, and we're still kind of working out the details around it, so stay tuned for more on there. But we want this to be a broad campaign because the Cures legislation affects so many people throughout the sort of biomedical research spectrum. It's not just patients, it's researchers, doctors, advocates, all of these people who are relying on this legislation. So we're gonna work on something that we hope to engage all of these different audiences and really turn up the pressure on Congress to make sure that they get this done, because we were actually looking at the legislative calendar today, and the Senate has very limited time to get this bill done. They have part of September and the first week of October until they go back to recess, and it's full-on campaign mode until lame duck at the end of the year. So that's kind of the state of play around Cures. I know we're running long on the call by about 10 minutes, so I apologize for that. I think we'll stick around here if folks have questions, either about what's going on in Congress, in D.C., about newborn screening. Mary Lee, I don't know if you're still on the phone or if others are still on. If they have questions about previous speakers too, now is a great time to ask them. I can see Biggie is unmuting all the lines, so we can take questions over the phone, or you can also send us a chat if you prefer that way. Thank you all. Okay, any questions or We're still waiting. It looks like we still have a lot of people on the call, too. That may have been a sneeze or the start of a question. Okay, well, it sounds like, you know, folks don't have any questions, so hopefully everything we presented was perfectly clear. As Vicki mentioned, you know, if folks have any questions, we're always available. And I don't think we're going on vacation this month, unlike everyone else, so we'll be around if you guys want to give us a call or email us any questions, or please feel free to contact the other speakers, too, if you have questions for them. So I think, Vicki, do you want to close this out?
Yes, absolutely. As Max said, you know, you can feel free to contact them. If you don't know how to get a hold of them, you can contact me, and I'll definitely put you in touch. And just to let you know, our next webinar, and I believe this one's going to be an in-person meeting as well in DC, is set for September 14th at 1 p.m., so just over a month away. So I look forward to having you all on that call then. So thank you again for taking part, and look forward to speaking with you all soon.
Thanks, everyone.